All right, class. Well, we had some technical difficulties today, but at the least, I already had this slideshow ready to go, and it's what I was going to walk through with you. Now I'll just have to do it, you know, on by video, and you can watch and respond to it. I did want to be able to have some discussions and things, so it made sense to meet together, but we'll just have to hold off on those. So I'll just jump right in because this is a fair bit to cover and not a ton of time to do it. Um, and this is looking at, like it says here, Introduction to Prehistory, how it's studied and what researchers have found. Okay, so what is prehistory? Well, prehistory, quite simply, is, and I'm going to move this down a little. Okay. All right. The time before written records. So that might be a word that can be a little intimidating, like prehistoric. It sounds sort of mysterious, which is fine, but the idea is it's just before there were written records. And so then how do we find out about people and, societies and that sort of thing before there were written records? Well, we turn to a few sciences, particularly archaeology, anthropology, and paleontology. So, what do we have? Archaeology, the study of human history and prehistory through the excavation of sites and analysis of artifacts and other physical remains. So we see that's kind of focused on the details. If we dig up a pot or a skeleton, then we can look at it, examine it, try to figure out something about that particular object and like what its function was. Well, then anthropologists come along, those who study anthropology, and they try to make sense of human societies and cultures and their development. So, anthropologists, there are still anthropologists today who, like cultural anthropologists, meaning people in modern societies, but there are also anthropologists who study old societies, ancient societies that don't exist anymore. And then thirdly, we have paleontology. And that's the science of the forms of life existing in former geologic periods as represented by their fossils. So paleontologists are particularly focused on fossils. So very, ancient old artifacts. And those are, just focused on the bones that have been fossilized. Okay, I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on prehistory because it's kind of just an add-on to us getting into more like history once we start having written records and also particularly when we see the development of civilizations. But I do think there are some important notes because this is mentioned in your book. You'll see them there, and then it's like, okay, what do we do with this information? And so it is worth noting Mary Leakey and Donald Johnson, they are scientists, researchers who have studied and examined archaeological digs, and they've found fossils of hominids. So they are paleontologists. They've found these fossils of hominids, which is a word meaning early primates that walked on 2 feet. And hominids are understandably controversial, particularly, well, for a Christian, they kind of go, well, what do we do with this information? Were there really earlier primitive type primates that evolved later into humans, or did this other kind of species just exist at some point in time? Well, it's beyond the scope of this class to really go deep into, these debates and what scientists say. There are people who are more knowledgeable than I am, like the ones that came last year, the from the Answers in Genesis group that know more about this stuff. If you're curious to know more, but I'll just say in brief, some things creation scientists say is a few important things. One, there's still a clear divide between what would be a human and what would be a non-human. So, for example, if we could find some different variations in skull shapes, and they would say, even today we can find skull shapes that look a bit different if you dig up a human skeleton in the Pacific Islands versus South America, but they're both still human. They're both still the same species, the same race, truly. I mean, we talk about races today, like the black race, white race, but really we're all one human race. And those are just kind of, very, very minor differences that don't make us different species. Okay, they also say the dating methods used to determine how old these skeletons are unreliable. And then finally, something like if you look in the book, it'll talk about human origins in Africa because the earliest skeletons that they found, they say if they found in Africa. Well, that might be the earliest ones that have been found so far, but um, who's to say that we won't find skeletons in the Fertile Crescent, like in, which is where Mesopotamia is. That is where we say the Garden of Eden was. Most people think it's there between the Tigris and the Euphrates. So it may be later on we actually find skeletons in that part of the world that demonstrate human origins from there that are actually earlier than the ones in Africa. So that's just kind of in brief an overview of those thoughts. But I want to go now to looking at when humans try to control nature within a time that we call the Neolithic Revolution. Okay, so this is just kind of a theory that researchers have come up with for how societies might have first started to develop, meaning like settled societies, when people, rather than going out and just, we say, like hunting and gathering, those people are often called hunter-gatherers. So they're nomads, meaning people who wander and just they follow their food. Now, with the beginnings of agriculture, humans set up in a place and they cultivate their food. This time is also called the Agricultural Revolution, but we normally call it the Neolithic Revolution, and the reason is there was another agricultural revolution that happened many centuries later. And so to distinguish this, I'll normally call it the Neolithic Revolution, but it is primarily a revolution in agriculture. So how do we see this happening? Well, what scientists believe is that as people might have been around a campsite, you're eating your fruits and vegetables and things, and of course the seeds are left over and they kind of just throw those out. At some point they start to notice, hey, these seeds are growing plants around us. Maybe we could do this on purpose. We could plant seeds and then grow the foods that we want. And sure enough, that works, right? And so eventually, when you do that, you're able to live in one place and not have to go out looking for food. You can just grow it for yourself where you are. Another aspect of this revolution, apart from the plant side of things, is what happens with animals. And it's a theory that you can see what's happening here. There's a dog herding sheep. I think those are sheep. Yeah, they look like they've been shorn recently, meaning their wool kind of clipped. But who's guiding these sheep into a pen? And so, similarly, scientists think maybe early peoples would chase animals into an enclosed area in order to kill them. So they kind of gather them up. At some point, they realize, hey, you know what? We don't need to kill all these animals right now. Maybe we can just trap them, keep them there in a fence or something enclosed, and then we can just go get the animals when we need them for their meat. So this is a process of domestication, which is the process of taming animals to make them subject to people. Okay, so a third important aspect of this agricultural revolution is something called slash and burn farming. It's very literal. It's when you slash, meaning cut down the plants in an area in order to clear a field. Now just make it exposed dirt so that you can plant the plants that you want in that area, a farm essentially, right? So I don't want just this grass or trees or whatever is in this place. I'll slash it all up, burn it afterward to clear it to that area to make exposed soil, and then plant the crops that I want to plant in that area. So this is a part of that Neolithic Revolution focused on agriculture. All right, the last thing that I will talk about here is the early civilization of Catal Huyuk, and I'm gonna pause for a second. Actually, well, I would say it'd be a good idea for you to pause the video, go get a hold of, well, you don't have your books, but I can post a PDF where you can read along with this. I'm going to be reading from chapter 1, section 2, this is page 18, and describing this civilization of Catal Huyuk, which is a pretty interesting place. And so pause, and then you hopefully come back. And this is what it says. In 1958, archaeologists discovered the agricultural village now known as Catal Huyuk, that's an approximate pronunciation, as the Forked Mound. It was located on a fertile plain in south central Turkey, about 30 miles from modern day, I think that should say Kenya. There's a typo there in the text, near a twin cone volcano. Catal Huyuk covered an area of about 32 acres. At its peak, no, I guess it is Konya, because I'm sorry, if it's south central Turkey, Konya must be a town, and Kenya is down in Africa. So okay, I'll backtrack. Near a twin cone volcano. Catal Huyuk covered an area of about 32 acres. At its peak 8,000 years ago, the village was home to 5,000 to 6,000 people who lived in about 1,000 dwellings. These rectangular shaped houses were made of brick and were arranged side by side like a honeycomb. Catal Huyuk showed the benefits of settled life. Its rich, well-watered soil produced large crops of wheat, barley, and peas. Villagers also raised sheep and cattle. Catal Huyuk's agricultural surpluses supported a number of highly skilled workers, such as potters and weavers. But the village was best known at the time for its obsidian products. This dark volcanic rock, which looks like glass, was plentiful. It was used to make mirrors, jewelry, and knives for trade. Catal Huyuk's prosperity also supported a varied cultural life. Archaeologists have uncovered colorful wall paintings depicting animals and hunting scenes. Many religious shrines were dedicated to a mother goddess. According to her worshippers, she controlled the supply of grain. The new settled way of life also had its drawbacks, some of the same that affected hunter-gatherer settlements. Floods, fire, drought, and other natural disasters could destroy a village. Diseases such as malaria spread easily among people living closely together. Jealous neighbors and roving nomadic bands might attack and loot a wealthy village like Catal Huyuk. Despite problems, these permanent settlements provided their residents with opportunities for fulfillment in work, in art, and in leisure time. As you will learn in Section 3, some early villages expanded into cities. These urban centers would become the setting for more complex cultures in which new tools, art, and crafts were created. So this is an introduction to the idea of civilization. We will go deeper into that later. But what I want to show and highlight here about Catal Huyuk is this unusual construction and that as to how it was made. It wasn't a huge place, but it was this type of city where people lived together. And look at how people would enter into their homes. I think you can see my arrow there. They wouldn't enter in from the side; they would come in from the top. And all the buildings are just rammed up next to each other. There aren't any streets that divide them. You just kind of walk along the top of this village or city and then descend down into your home, which I find really fascinating and unusual that people could have come up with this way of living that no one would even think about doing today. It wouldn't really work with how we live today, but it's interesting that it worked for them. And we might look a little more at Catal Huyuk next week. So, in any case, that is where I'll leave it. I hope this made some sense. Obviously, if you were unclear on anything, go back and watch those parts. I will share this slideshow with you. I know there's not a lot of text on the slideshow, but hopefully the images and things can serve as little mental flashcards of a sort to help bring to mind these things I've talked about. So sorry for technology issues today. I will see you all next week, and hopefully things will go a little better, but I appreciate y'all's good attitude, and I will see you all soon.